Thank you very much, everybody, for joining us today. We are pleased to have two guests with us, Scott Kleeb and Dave Southworth, and they're going to share their insights about the plight of Ohio's ag producers, who we know are facing unprecedented struggles right now. And they seem to be left out of the vote often, particularly by Democrats, and we need to try to fix that. Um, Scott Kleeb works for a family cattle ranch in the Nebraska Sandhills, and he advises campaigns on rural and veterans issues. He also runs the Poster Project and is a member of the Truman National Security Project. Dave Southworth is a Columbus native and graduate of Thomas Worthington High School, and he's a 15-year civilian Air Force employee. He's also a freshly minted member of the Truman National Security Project. We're very, very pleased to have you with us and anxious to hear what you have to say. So I'm going to go ahead and give you the floor. They have preferred a very informal session. So when you have questions, raise your hand or use the little hand thing, and I'll try to come around to you and we'll go for it like that. Thank you so much. Go for it.
Thank you, Debbie, very much. I'm going to go ahead and since Dave is from here, from Ohio, Dave, why don't you just start explaining kind of a little bit about who the Truman National Security Project is and while he's doing, and that's how Dave and I actually met each other. And as Debbie said, please open conversation. I do have some slides just to kind of help shape a conversation. But please jump in. We want this to be a conversation. Debbie, would you mind passing me the presenter capabilities so I can throw up my screen when I start talking?
I think you can do it already because we've never had a problem with that before.
Okay,
I don't think you have to be the host to do that with that. Let's give it a try. I think just to share a screen and you should be able to do it.
sounds good.
Okay.
Everybody see that?
Yep.
All right, go ahead,
So
Dave.
yeah, so I'll go ahead and kick us off. So Dave Southworth, born, raised, currently live here in Columbus, Ohio. I live in Hilliard, Ohio, right at the moment. I grew up I was actually born in Columbus on the west side, in the hilltop. And then my parents, when I was about to start elementary school, we moved over to another part of Columbus, but we're in Worthington City Schools. So for most of my formative years as a younger and teenager, I could see the Anheuser-Busch Brewery from my front porch, for example. Um, and then graduated high school in 1997, and then moved to Dayton to go to Wright State University. Met my wife there. Graduated in 2002, and then we moved to DC for most of the 2000s. Had a couple kids, and then things were getting too expensive, so we were like, let's go back to Ohio. So been here for the last 15 years again. So other than that brief interregnum in DC, I've been here in Ohio, in Columbus, mostly for my entire life. I have my uh, Ohio, Michigan free since 1803 t-shirt on. Go Bucks, Michigan sucks. This is a great weekend this past weekend. Also, I want to point out, while Scott is the main driver of this, and he's just like somebody I'm totally impressed with. Um, he has been leading this thing called the Poster Project, which I'm sure he's going to get into a lot more during his discussion. And the focus of this talk is um, rural issues. He and his team has put together a number of different graphics covering a bunch of different topics. So mainly initiated around like when the Doge stuff was really happening, really just it unconscionable cuts across the U.S. government. Um, that it has some really great graphics about how those cuts impacted Ohio. So it could be education department, it could be USDA lunch issues, SNAP benefits, which I know is a big thing here in Ohio right now. Uh, the way that USAID cuts are going to impact farmers in our rural communities. So I dropped a link to that, to the Ohio specific folder at the very beginning or at the very top of the chat. So if you guys want to click on that, it'd be really great. And then, so to get back to what's how Scott and I know each other, we are both members of what's called the Truman National Security Project. So it started off about 20 years ago. It was founded in response to the 2004 election. Um, I was, I was in my 20s at the time, but I recall being pretty devastated after that because, the Democrats ran with John Kerry focusing on his military service and his, heroism in Vietnam and such. He was attacked for that, and it was really disgusting. And so Democrats, including a couple of really incredible folks, um, started a thing called the Truman National Security Project. The original intent was to develop an organization that would push for a strong, vibrant national security policy for the Democratic Party. So the way that it has evolved today is we have four basic pillars. So we're focused on diplomacy, um, democracy. What I'm blanking, Scott. What are the other two?
Uh, International development
Development,
and
defense.
yes, defense.
In
Thank you.
defense. So it's basically trying to have a strong foreign policy, strong and smart foreign policy for Democrats. One of the things that we've been working on here in Truman Project, especially since the 2024 election, is different ways that we can help the Democrats in future elections. So not only in the midterms in 26, but in 2028. And we have actually a different project that's focused all the way out to 2076. We call it the Tricentennial Project. And one of the many things that we're trying to do with that is to develop like a messaging campaign and an overall um, mission and platform for the Democrats that, among other things, we can make sure that we can have both a strong foreign policy that will be beneficial to the U.S. population at large, so that that all members of the citizenry, the population can feel the benefits, understand why for example, you need an organization like USAID that, while a lot of people think, well, we're just spending money to go overseas and not really benefiting Americans. In fact, as we saw in this past, in 2025, cutting the USA not only is going to kill a lot of very poor people, especially children overseas, it's going to have a huge impact on farmers here in the US who sold their goods to USA to then ship overseas. So that's just kind of the number the type of things that we in the Truman Project work on. Um, and yes, that's basically it. As an introduction, Scott, if I missed anything, please jump in. But otherwise, I'm gonna turn it over to you.
No, I think you basically covered it. And I do want to get into the Truman Project, or sorry, the poster project a little bit. So thank you for bringing that in, because that did start around the closure. The killing of USAID is kind of where that was the first agency that was killed by this administration. And the origin of it sort of started with that agency, and showing the impacts of closing this agency that very few people had ever heard about, um, and the impact that it had on Ohio agriculture and Arkansas agriculture, and rice farmers in Louisiana. And so that was really the origin of the poster project, which we'll get to in a second. But I just want to say thank you, Dave, for introducing me to Debbie, and Debbie for allowing me to come on and just share some thoughts about rural America. I do have a little bit of an agenda just to kind of set this, and I am most prepared to talk about agriculture. It's what I know, it's what I live. Happy to do that, but I think what I wanted to start with, at least today, is sort of a big picture of rural and the importance of the rural vote, and how for the past 30 years, my party, I am a Democrat, um, that we have made a conscious choice to not care about the rural vote, and that has had tremendous impacts across the board, as we're seeing. And we can get into that too. But it's great to have, I know Meg said she was from rural county. So Meg, jump in anytime that anything I say is either right or wrong, which could be true too. This is just one guy's thought. And I know there's a
Oh,
lot of
I agree with you 100% already. So
great, good. And John, I'm actually anxious that you're a filmmaker. Once we kind of do get into the poster project, I think there's some really cool stuff that people like yourself can help the Ohio chapter, the Central Ohio chapter, really do some really interesting things around stories that are not being told. They're not being told in our press. They're not being told online. They're not being told because, frankly, a lot of folks in rural aren't seen. They're not seen by a lot of folks. And that's part of the struggle that we're in. So the fact that you can help amplify their stories, their lives, what's important about them, what they care about, the things that they do to actually drive our economy, is critical. And just being seen is so important for folks. So with that, can everybody see the screen that I'm sharing? Okay. All right. So this is very crude. I want to be honest. Like, I'm not a Canva person, right? I'm not a graphic designer. I use graphic designers for the poster project. But just a quick overview. I want to take a real quick look at why rural matters. Get into some myths versus facts about the rural voter. Um, in my opinion, there's 6 big themes that rural voters, we've become nationalized, like our identity as rural voters, and I'm a very proud rural Democrat. Our identity as a rural voter, before there were Ohio Dems, there were Nebraska Dems, there were Maine Dems, like there was this difference. The term rural voter has really become a nationalized concept for a lot of rural people. They identify as rural more than they identify with a lot of other things. And there's really 6 big themes that kind of tie those together. A look at why 5%, you're going to hear me say the 5% a lot. And just a quick look at why that matters. And I'm probably going to really upset in this example. I'm going to upset everybody on this screen, and I'll get to it in a second. And then also the poster project and how you guys might be able to use it. So that's a quick overview. Don't mean to spend a whole lot of time on this stuff, but I just kind of wanted to set the table if it's helpful. So this is the map of rural versus urban. Just look at that for just a second. I don't think we really understand how much of our country is rural. It's really hard to look at this map and think that we will ever be competitive in the United States Senate or in gerrymandered House districts or in an increasingly polarized national environment where we're fighting for electoral votes in just 6 states. And frankly, it was only 12 cities in 6 states that we were fighting for. The rural voters everywhere, like literally every state. The only state that has a really small contingency of rural votes is Rhode Island. Every other state has a significant number of their votes coming from rural areas. So again, just looking at this map, it becomes really difficult to see how we can ever compete again with all 50 states and how we can get a Supreme Court that aligns with who we are and what we value, that we can get senators representing us without the importance of the rural vote. You guys know this map a hell of a lot better than I do, but that's especially in the gerrymandered nature of your districts in Ohio. Republicans have purposely pulled in rural areas to diminish the urban center votes, because they know that, frankly, we're not really good as Democrats at talking to the rural voter. So they're doing this purposely to bolster their own. Now, I think some of this is changing. We can get to it in a second, but having advocates like yourself actually take these areas seriously and chip away and get that 5 or 10% more of this vote, these gerrymandered districts are going to mean a whole lot less to the future of Ohio and frankly to our country, because everything is localized now to a point where what happens and we saw this with Dobbs, right? What happens in Mississippi a state that very few of us have been to or cared about its politics, took away the rights of half of our population. So these states, we cannot overlook these states anymore, no matter how red they are, no matter how whatever they are, no matter how rural they are, no matter how foreign they might seem to those of us living in New York City or Chicago or LA or Denver or whatever it is. The Dobbs decision in a state that very few people cared about the politics of Mississippi had an impact across our country in ways that we haven't even really begun to deal with the impacts of. So, some myths and facts about the rural voter. And I'm just talking largely now. I'm not specifically talking about anybody here. I just met you. So please don't impart anything I'm saying on anybody here, but just some larger myths about the rural voter that I've learned a lot of people who think like I do impart on rural voters. The first one is that we only care about cultural and wedge issues. That's the most important thing. That the trans ban is the reason why, we're going to vote for Trump, right? It's all these, it's abortion, it's gays, it's guns, it's trans, it's all those things. Like that is more motivating to us than anything else. And those things don't align with my values. And so we can't get these votes. It's just simply not true. In every single survey, the thing that rural voters care about as much as any other voter is jobs, healthcare, family, schools. Bottom line. Sure, there are a significant segment of folks in rural areas that just think that we need to be, frankly, assholes to people and not treat people equally, but that is not the majority. In fact, that's about 20 to 25% of rural voters. And by the way, it's also about 20 to 25% of urban voters, who, for them, cultural issues are the most important thing. The second myth is that rural is mostly Republican. I bet there's more than one person here who thought rural is mostly Republican. That's also just not true. Unaffiliated, or in some cases independent, depends on the state where you come, is universally twice as big as GOP voters are in rural areas. And this isn't just specific to Ohio or Nebraska. This is nationwide. You go to any state, the unaffiliated voter is a bigger segment of the rural vote than is the Republican vote. State that I'm most familiar with, Nebraska, we're about a third Democrats in the state of Nebraska. We're about a third, we're more than a third Republican, but independent is by far the biggest group, twice the size in rural Nebraska is the independent or unaffiliated vote than the GOP. The next myth is that rural is overwhelmingly white. It is. There's a lot of white people that live in rural, but the fact of the matter is over a third of rural voters are not white. In fact, that is the largest growing population is non-white rural voters. And we saw this, I think the last election, is anybody familiar with what happened in the Rio Grande Valley in South Texas? It's about 75% Latino, and Trump won it and won it by big margins down there, which just blew the mind of a lot of people in the Democratic Party. Yes, Mike.
Excuse my ignorance. What's BIPOC stand for?
BIPOC. It's basically people of color. It's
Okay.
Black, Latino, Asian.
Thank you.
Yep, no problem. So this is another myth that we are white. Now, we are definitely more white in some areas, right? But over 50% of rural voters in Mississippi, we use that example, are Black. But they're still identifying more as a rural voter than they are as a Black American in a lot of times. Now, they're both, right? I'm not saying that there's any difference, but there's a ruralness that we take on that is not dependent on skin color, has really nothing to do with it. It has to do with how we identify in the world in which we live. Another myth. We have to campaign where the people are. And there's no, like, rural is pretty sparsely populated, and there's a lot of people that live in Columbus. And if we can just juice the numbers up in Columbus, then we can hold on to a couple of more seats, or we can win. Fact of the matter is, rural is about 20% of the population. That's a fact. But we're 37% of the voters. We vote. We vote for school board. We vote, I mean, we vote for the people that we know in our communities, right? We turn out at overwhelmingly high numbers compared to other places in suburbs, urban areas, or in urban areas.
If I could just jump
So
in for a second, could you go back to the congressional district slide? So, I mean, everybody, I'm sure everybody here on this call knows this, but so other than Joyce Beatty's seat in the third, I'm in the 15th. So I live in the suburbs of Columbus, but my congressman, who I've never seen before, Mike Carey, has, you can see all the way down from Athens to Clinton County. I have in Hilliard, I have very little in common with folks there. But in order to win that seat, uh, and I'm not sure, like Allison Riso a couple years ago when she was running against Kerry, I'm not sure how much she campaigned in those areas, but in order to have any chance to win that seat, and I think she ended up losing by what, 10 or 12 points or something like that. Those are the areas, that's the vast majority of where the campaign should have been done. In north of Columbus, like in Delaware County is where my mom lives up by Allen Creek. So they taken some parts of Franklin County and then diluted it with lots of Delaware and Morrow County areas that I remember the special election was 2 or 3 years ago now, the Balderson, Danny O'Neill, I think was his name. I'm blanking.
Danny O'Connor.
O'Connor. Yeah. So that was a very close election. But it ended up, the Republican ended up winning because of probably the rural vote that
Well,
we weren't able, like Scott was saying, we weren't able to juice the suburban and exurban votes enough in order for O'Connell to get to overcome the rural vote at the time. So I think we have
that
two
was our
very specific local examples of what Scott has been talking about.
that Danny O'Connor race was one that we were very involved in as Indivisible. It was
Oh,
District 12, and we worked really hard on that and almost made it. It went out canvassing, and nearly pulled it off, but didn't quite get there. Mike's got his hand up.
Yeah, is that the current congressional map?
Probably not.
Yeah, I tell you what, because I'm looking at Perry, and I know District 12 cuts Perry right down below New Lexington, which is right in the middle of Perry. And so I think I mean, it still is gerrymandered as crazy. I mean, but I think that's maybe an older map.
I mean, even if it isn't the vote
Yeah.
or the map that we're going to vote on next year, I mean, Ohio is what, 4 or 5 cities with surrounded by soybean fields and cornfields, right? So
Yeah, true.
even if it's there, around the edges, it's not exactly the same that we're going to be voting on. Look at 4. That's Jordan's district. Can you tell me anything that Shelby and Lorain County have in common? That is a ridiculously gerrymandered or seat, and a lot of it is very rural. Um, and I know that we've tried multiple times to put people against Jordan who absolutely should not be in Congress or anywhere near any kind of leadership role. But in order to try to actually get him out of Congress, we need to start doing a lot of things and adopt the mindset that Scott has been talking about, like with his myths on these 2 slides.
So yes, this map is probably old, but I'll tell you, it is gonna get worse, because Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, depending on what the Supreme Court does with Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, we're about to see. I know that we're living through this mid-cycle, gerrymandering right now that's going on. it's going to get a whole lot worse if Section 2 is struck down, which everybody is thinking it probably will get down. So all the more reason why, coming back to this slide, that 38% of voters live in rural areas, that's going to go up. Because of the new maps, because of everything else. So I just pulled this map off the interstate, and I'll be honest with you, I did not interrogate which version. There were about 5 that came down, so I just grabbed one. But the point is the same. They're gerrymandering because they think that we don't know rural voters and that we don't care about rural voters, and they've actually invested a lot of money and time and attention and are really good at speaking to the things that rural voters do care about, which is why we're voting 75% GOP, and even for the unaffiliated, right? That we're voting 75% GOP and 25% for the Dem in these rural areas. The next myth is here that, well, we do campaign in rural areas, right? I mean, Dave mentioned a couple of examples. John Tester's probably the best example. He's my favorite senator from Montana. The whole state of Montana is basically a rural state. He was an amazing senator for the time that he was there. I've worked with him. I know he's an amazing guy. He looks like every other Montanan. I mean, the guy, lost fingers in a meat grinder, for God's sakes, right? I mean, this is as rural as they get. He's from a town of, I think Big Sandy is like 112 people or something like that. I mean, it's as rural as they get. Those are the exceptions. We've had Begich in Alaska. We've had a few other places, but for every $1 that my party spends trying to convince, either through a door knocker or through an ad or through a social media campaign or anything else, we're spending $12 in Columbus. We're not spending it in Delaware County. I don't know the counties as well. I think Delaware County is one of the counties that is not in Columbus.
Right.
But all of our attention is focused on the urban centers. Our dollars show it. When you have somebody come in and campaign for somebody, all of the attention is really just in trying to juice up that urban vote, basically. So those are just, again, some myths versus some facts about kind of who we are and about how seriously we've actually taken the rural vote, which frankly is not very serious in the last 30 years. All right. Here's some big overarching themes from my perspective that I think if the 12, 15, however many people are on here, if you can tell another 12 to 15 and they can tell more about like who we are as rural voters, because again, we identify as rural voters. In many cases, I have a lot more in common with a rural Mainer than I do with somebody from Omaha. And I, as a rural voter, really feel the way of life and the impact of being in the timber industry or in the fishing industry in Maine a whole lot more than I do an urban voter in downtown Omaha. I just have a whole lot more in common with them. Myself, I could go to, the Delta of Mississippi and get along famously with a rural Black person down there who's farming, because I know that life, like that ruralness that ties us from, the whether it's the reservations in South Dakota or the Black Belt in the South, or like I just have a whole lot more in common with those people, even though I'm white, even though I'm upper middle class, even though I'm all these sorts of things that you wouldn't think, that I get along a lot more famously with a shrimper from the southernmost parish of Louisiana than I do with somebody living in my own state that's an hour and a half away in Lincoln. I just do. And that is true. The importance of the 5% is, if those of us on this call and those of us who we interact with and talk with, if we work for 5% more of the rural vote, we'll likely get 10 by just showing up and caring for the concerns that those people have, by using a term that a lot of like liberals and progressives like to use, seeing them. That's a real thing, right? We have not seen them or their life. If we work for 5%, we're likely going to get 10%. If we go to that small town called Big Sandy in Montana, everybody's going to know that you were there. Everybody's going to know that Indivisible was doing something in that town, especially if it was focused on trying to save their school. Man, you just made 112 friends, right? So you will likely get more than the 5%. But trying to get people to think about, let's get 15% of that vote is a lot harder. Just let's work for 5% and you're going to get more than that. I promise you. The second one is community is a huge, huge concept for us. We know our neighbors. If you're driving through rural Nebraska and you break down, I'm going to stop and help and pick you. And, I'm going to change your tire for you. I'm going to drive you to town. I'm going to make sure you're okay, even if I don't know who you are. Community is a really big concept for us. And I know community is important in other areas too, but we feel community in a way that and this could be wrong. It very well could be wrong. I've never lived in a suburban area, but we, at least in rural, feel like we understand and care about community more than the suburbs that I drive through in West Omaha. Like they don't really know their neighbors. They don't invite them over for, they just don't stop by. Like I'll just go into somebody's house, right? I mean, my neighbors will check my mail when I'm gone. They'll feed my cats. They'll feed my dog. We just do that kind of stuff. I shop for boots 100 miles away from where I live because I know the people in Valentine, Nebraska, and I like them. So, I mean, again, community for us is big geography. It's just a really big concept for us. And I think that those of us on our side of the ledger, we like community. Like this is not a foreign concept for us either. This is a way into the rural vote, understanding how big community is for us. Everybody here believes in community, thinks that we're all stronger when we're all stronger, and that if we work for somebody, that's going to make my life better too. So this is not a foreign concept that we have on this call, but it's I want to underline the importance of it for rural people. There's another one that I think a lot of people on this call, because I heard you guys were organizing against Tesla, for example, as one of your actions. Rural hates big. We hate big. We hate big ag. We can get into the ag story in a little bit, but 10% of farmers are getting 90% of the support. We hate big ag. We hate big tech. Data centers are the big issue right now, but we also hate the algorithms that are feeding our kid trash, right? Yes, right to repair. We hate the fact that when my combine breaks down in the field, that I've got to call my dealership for him to send somebody out. It might be 2 days. Meanwhile, my beans are withering on the vine and I've just stopped work. And if I don't get my beans into the elevator might be full because we're not selling it to fucking China anymore, right? So that elevator is now full. So the fact that I have to wait 2 days to come out for them to plug in some diagnostic thing when I can, with some gum and shoelaces, can probably fix it myself. But that's going to work. If I touch my own tractor that I just spent $250,000 buying, I've just voided my warranty, which means now I can't get anything ever replaced or fixed on it, even if it's not my fault. We hate big oil. We hate big green. We hate big business. We hate the fact that we shop at Walmart, we shop at Dollar General because it's all we have left, but we hate the fact that they ran them out of town. We hate the fact that the gun store that I used to go and, buy my shotguns at is now the Walmart store, that the gun store that used to fix my guns doesn't exist anymore. And so I got to buy a new gun if I can't fix my gun. And yeah, we hate big government. We hate people telling us how to live our lives. And this is the one that I think probably trips up a lot of folks because they only focus on the government piece of it. And I say, again, not anybody specific to this call. I'm just saying our community as people who don't like Jim Jordan, they lean in on the big government a lot, right? We don't lean in enough on the other bigs. And by big green, what I mean by this, and I'm going to brag about my wife for a second. The big green, like, we're not opposed for the most part. Yeah, again, there's 25-30% of us that hate it for political reasons, but we're not opposed. You know where the most wind turbines are in America right now? Iowa. Iowa produces 60% of their energy from wind. The other big states, Oklahoma and Texas, we're not opposed to wind. We're not opposed to wind turbines. What we're opposed to is when Vestas comes in and tells us that we're going to put this here and you have no say over what it is, that you have no voice in this process because it's being determined by some land agents in wherever they're coming from and some politicians in Oklahoma City. That's the part that we hate. So when I say big green, I mean the same way. The oil has screwed us, right? Like we're extractive industries in rural areas, from ag to mining to now energy production to timber to a lot of things. They've come into our communities and taken and extracted it out and leaving us nothing. And the way that big oil has operated for 70 years, unfortunately, those of us on the progressive side don't like to admit this, but big solar and big wind is often operating the very same way. And that's what we hate about it. So I'm going to brag about my wife for a second because she's working in a lot of these rural areas. And she recognizes this. And so what she's developing is something called community benefit agreements. So that when a renewable energy project comes into an area, the entire community is going to benefit from that, right? So they're going to be doing profit sharing with communities so that they're not just what they've often said is, oh, the tax base is going to go down, but nobody's taxes ever go down. So nobody sees the reduction in property taxes that they always talk about, but what they do see is the new community center being built. They do see their rural fire departments being trained on a carbon pipeline that's coming through. And now this carbon pipeline company is going to be spending $750,000 training rural firefighters. That's a big deal. That communities all along the route of that pipeline are going to see the benefits of that development. Their rural firefighters are going to get better trained. Their communities are going to get better schools and community buildings. They're going to get better libraries. They're going to get after school centers for their kids. Allowing the communities to be part of these decision-making processes is critical in rural areas. We talked about this a little bit, but rural's complex. We're rich and we're poor. We're young and we're old, and yeah, we're diverse. We're a lot more diverse than people think we are. Some of the most vibrant rural communities before ICE were Latino communities, frankly. I mean, there's towns in Nebraska that would frankly be dead right now had it not been for immigration, had it not been for the last 30, 40, 50 years of people coming in and making these towns alive again in ways that they frankly didn't. And we're happy that the town of, Schuyler, Nebraska didn't die because I'm proud that my kid went to that high school and that we're warriors and all of that sort of thing, right? And we're happy that that happened. Now, again, there's racist assholes that exist, of course, but for the most part, we understand our communities couldn't function without this. Again, I'm not talking about the 30% MAGA assholes here. I'm talking about how we get that 5%, which will lead us to get actually 10%. Here's another one that I think is important for people who are living in urban areas to understand about the rural voter. We like where we live, pure and simple. We love it. One of the favorite questions that I get, not favorite as an example, because it's really quite bad, is what do you guys do on the weekend? Same stuff you guys do, man. We have friends over, we watch videos, we play games, we do the same stuff. We eat at like we do the same stuff. We might do a few things a little different. We probably hunt a little bit more than people in Omaha do. We might fish a little bit more, but by and large, we like spending time with our family. We like where we live. And I think that there is a perception among, again, not anybody on this call potentially, but just out there that if you could afford to move, you would have, because more stuff is happening in the cities than is happening in the rural areas. And that's not true. We like where we live, which is again why I can go into the Delta of Mississippi and get along a hell of a lot better with some black farmer down there, or some timberman or lobsterman or shrimper in Louisiana or Maine or wherever it is, because I know that you want to see Pride Fest. Go to any Friday night football game in Ohio's small towns. Like you guys are a proud football state. In every single small town, they're damn proud of that school. I mean, Dave started this call off talking about the connections that he had with Debbie in a one school. Like we like where we live. And it frankly pains us that our kids do have to go elsewhere to get opportunities. This is one, what is old is new again. And this is probably my biggest drive right now in the work that I'm trying to do with campaigns and groups like yours, frankly, across is there was, so we've got a farmstead. And I love telling this story about, we've got an outhouse. We call her Eleanor. Like we've named our outhouse. Okay. We've called her Eleanor because Eleanor Roosevelt in the 1930s thought it was important that rural people were not pissing in buckets, that they deserved just as much pride. They deserved just as to just have some basic sanitation. Like that was a big push for Eleanor Roosevelt. And so she actually developed not just a shack that people go and use outside. It's a beautiful two-seat with a urinal, gorgeous urinal, because she thought that rural people deserve the same pride and the same honor of even just using a privy, right? Of just that most basic function that we do every single day, that it was important for rural people just as much as it was everybody else to have somewhere that looked nice when you did your business. And we still have that. And I think that there's something that we can do as a party, my party, I don't know anybody's party affiliations here, but to give that pride of place, to understand that people do like where they live and that you deserve the same shit living there as anybody else does. And it ought to be just as damn nice. Like we can take a lesson from the Eleanor Roosevelts of the world and realize that these are proud people and we should invest in that pride. And we can get that 5% to turn into 10%, to turn into 15% by just understanding a few of these things. We like where we live. We want to share it with you. And we deserve the same stuff that you guys have in cities too, frankly. So if we can do all of that, if we can understand that and we can articulate that and we can push that out and we can organize around that, now this is where I'm going to piss everybody off because I tried to get the numbers for Ohio and my data people weren't able to get it in time. So I apologize, but I've got it for Michigan. Thank God they won, that Ohio won last time. But if we can do all of that, look at what happens in Michigan. So this is 2022 and they're coming up with some more elections. If we get just 5% more, I mean, it's a split house, right? If we can get 5% more in Michigan, the Michigan State House becomes more solidly blue by just getting 5% more of the rural vote. We gain 3 seats. We lock in those seats that we've already got in a much bigger way, but we also gain 3 seats. And remember what I said, if we can work for 5, work our ass off for 5, we're likely going to get 10 because everybody in Big Sandy is going to know when you came to organize for their water or to stop that data center that's going to pollute their water, they're going to know who was there. They might not vote for you the first time, but we keep coming back. If you work your ass off for that 5%, you're likely going to get 10. Then look what happens. I mean, the GOP goes to, I mean, it's a secondary party in Michigan at this point. And here's where that happens in places that, frankly, Democrats aren't really good, the Upers and the Upper Peninsula, right? Like we just don't compete in the Upper Peninsula very much at all. But we could. There's of the districts up there, we could win 2 of them if we just tried. If we just kind of thought about who we are and what we care about and just listened a little bit more, like we could have massive impacts. So that I'm going to stop there because I just wanted to start with kind of like who we are and why we're valuable. We're a third of the vote, and the things you care about, I guarantee we care about them too. We just haven't had the language, frankly, or we haven't seen them as a party for the past 30 years. We've just thought, to quote, the famous quote from Schumer, that for every rural voter we lose in Western Pennsylvania, we're going to gain 2 voters in the suburbs. And look what it's got us, right? Look what it's gotten us at best a 50-50 Congress, a 50-50 Senate, and it's going to get harder and harder with more and more gerrymandering and more. So I'm going to stop there and just see if there's any questions or
And the
thoughts.
change in apportionment in 2030.
And yeah,
And when VR2 gets probably gangsed by the Roberts Court.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Meg's got her hand up.
Yes, I'm so sorry. I have to leave in just like 2 minutes, but I want to thank you so much because you have validated stuff that I've been saying. And I feel like I'm not shouting into an empty room. Um, so thank you very much. It was helpful and inspiring because I think 5% is doable. We just have to do it. Thank you.
Thanks, Meg.
thanks, Meg.
This is a good reason for us to be recording this because then Meg can see the rest of it on her own time. Anybody else have a comment or question before Scott continues? Mike?
Yeah, Scott, we live in Fairfield County, which in Pickerington, which is really an extension of Columbus. Now, it used to be very rural. It's still some rural, but the area that we work with a lot is Perry County, which is the county only has 35,000 people in it. Okay, and it's you would I think categorize it as rural. Now, one of our members said this, and we meet with those folks, okay, and try to generate some kind of community to, well, frankly, to stand up to some things that are happening in our society today. Now, this person is not on this call, I don't believe, and if she is, she has laryngitis, so she can't say this. But she was talking. She said that she feels like she's in isolation, and this is very rural, and she's lived there her entire life. We lived there for 44 years. She said that when she tries to get people involved, if they're teachers, they say, well, my school board's totally red, and I want to keep my job. Okay. If she tries to get family members who privately will say, yeah, we're with you, but okay, will you put up the sign? No, we don't want our property destroyed. Okay, and we know that there'll be retaliation. Okay, those are just a couple of things that she mentioned, and that's the rural. Okay, and I haven't grown up in a rural area. So I'm probably missing something, but we spend a good part of our life in a rural community as teachers. How do you confront that? Okay, I mean,
how do you deal with it?
yeah, I mean, it's a little different. I mean, yeah, the people in New Lexington, Ohio, are very proud of New Lexington, Ohio, but it's it's a neglected part of our state, southeastern Ohio, and there's a lot of poverty. Uh, I don't know how do we're trying to get people to feel a sense of like, well, we can do something about what's going on. And yet you have those kinds of responses. And it's true, we've been meeting since March, and we have about 10 or 12 people. At one time, we had maybe 20, 25 that would come to meetings. I don't know where we're missing. Got any response to that? If you don't, and she even said in her text yesterday about this, I hate to be a Debbie Downer. And I do too. But basically, that's the reality I see.
Mm-hmm.
Because I haven't lived there my entire life. I don't know. What's your thought?
So you've identified something that's very real, and I'm glad you did because I don't want to come in and be Pollyannish about it. The thing to remember, Mike, is it's taken us 30 years to get here. It's not going to happen in 30 days.
Yeah.
So it is going to be hard. And the fact that the fact that you've got teachers who are reticent to be outspoken in some of the, because they have kids in their school, they know who people are. They don't necessarily want to be the person on the front lines because they've got to live there. It's a lot easier for us to come into that community and try to organize, and they've got to live there with what, and there's 30% of people who are assholes, right? Who are going to retaliate. They're gonna get on the Facebook groups, they're gonna get on the social media platforms, and they're gonna make that teacher's life hell. So what you identified is a real thing. Now, what I will say is there are people who care about some of the same things that we care about. And if we can organize around those, and you're the one who is there organizing around those, they're going to remember that. Well, I'm going to turn to my wife again. She's amazing at this work, by the way. So I use her a lot, but she's really good at this. She started a group called Bold Nebraska, which then became the Bold Alliance, and now they're working in like 7 different states, 8 different states across the country. But when they started, their focus was on the Keystone XL pipeline, which is the tar sands pipeline that came down, cut right through the Nebraska Sandhills, right through the Ogallala Aquifer. And she started meeting with people in these towns, and they would say, oh, they would say things like, God, I thought you were supposed to have, horns on your head, because she's a big Democrat. She's chair of the Democratic Party here in Nebraska, by the way, right? So she's a very outspoken Democrat. Um, and she's like, no, I'm not. And they started to get into some of the issues. She's like, look, I'm not here for any of that stuff. I'm here because I'm here to save your land. Like, that's why I'm here. I'm here because I know that you've got pictures on your wall of your homesteading family that came in, that lived in a Saudi and built this up, and you're a fourth generation farmer who's about to lose your land because a foreign oil pipeline is going to cut through it with rights of eminent domain, and they're going to take your land without you ever having a say because of eminent domain. I hate eminent domain being able to take over your land for their private gain. That's why I'm here. So we can argue about guns, gays, and God later, but let's focus on the fight with the Keystone XL pipeline. And the group that she started, had about 35,000 members at its, during that fight. About 90% of them were Republicans. Like they were with her on that fight. They're not voting for Democrats yet, but man, they know who was standing with them on that big fight, which was about their land, their property, their heritage, their family, frankly, going back 4 or 5 generations. So we can find those battles, but it means doing what she did, which is you shut up for the first year and you hear what people along the route care about. She cared about it for a different, she cared about it, but finding ways in which to find commonality with people that frankly think they're so polarized that there's nothing in place. So there's a lot of those issues. And I think that this administration in particular and what they've done between Doge and what they've done with the rescissions and what they've done with the one big beautiful bill and what they've continued to do are opening up ways for us to have those conversations that frankly were a lot harder to have, whether it is, the cuts that they're making to the Department of Education. And I can use this to kind of pivot over to the poster project, but I want to see if there's any other questions first. But there's a lot there that they have done that we can work with. And I think that we should seize this moment for that reason.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm not seeing any hands. Anybody have something that I can only see this strip along?
I have a question, Debbie. Can you hear me?
Yes. Katie.
Yes, thanks. Yes, hi, thanks so much. I thought your talk was wonderful and I totally agree with it. I worry about the Ohio Democratic Party and how we're going to get them on board with that, but I absolutely agree with it. I wondered, I follow a Substack by a woman named Jess Piper. The Substack is called The View from Rural Missouri, and she's been saying the exact things that you've said. She's very persuasive. She's like an educator and former educator and kind of campaigner and everything. But one of the issues that she mentions regularly that I missed if you addressed this is the lack of media in rural areas that is presenting democratic viewpoints, or or sort of even like policy or legislative kind of priorities, and that, like, radio, newspapers, there's like nothing for people to read where they can get a viewpoint that's not a corporate Republican one. And that's, and in many ways telling them the truth about legislation coming out or, being proposed or all of that. And I just wondered if that, if you had any thoughts about that or ideas, or if that's something you're also concerned about.
Very much. And first of all, Jess is a great woman. I know Jess. She's fantastic.
Yeah.
If anybody doesn't follow her, they should. She's a school teacher, but now she's as passionate about the rural vote and rural issues as I am. She's wonderful. Invite her to your community. She's a great presenter. She's fabulous. So, and what Jess has recognized is that, yes, and I have the same concerns that she does about the fact that there just isn't a whole lot that's available for people. There's news deserts everywhere, frankly, but especially in rural areas. But what she does really well is she actually goes to these communities and she meets with people in the communities and she puts out her Substack and she's on the local radio station when she comes to town. Like, she is getting into these spaces to have a different conversation. And so I think we can all learn from her example and how she's doing that to just try and offer a different perspective. Because, and I want to come back to this. Here's what Jess knows great, is that there's 30% of people in rural areas that are going to be Democrats. There's 70% of people who are unaffiliated or GOP, and they're not getting that information. And she knows that of that 70%, more than half of them don't really like MAGA. MAGA just happens to be the loudest voices. They're loudest on media. They're loudest on our social media feeds. They're just the loud ones. And what that leads to is a perception from places that aren't rural that that's what rural is. It's a bunch of, meatheads with red hats. So she purposely goes on radio stations, and when she's in those communities, she purposely gets into those places. But as there's new media forming, and this is again where the poster project came from, there's a lot of ways that everybody on this phone call can get into those spaces, because more and more of us are getting our news from TikTok or from Facebook or from Instagram or from a lot of those places. John can put together a great 30-second video, and you guys can collectively think about, how do we get this? There's always going to be people in the communities that are respected, right? And there's always going to be people that, whether it's the principal who cares about the fact that 20% of his school budget just was cut and he doesn't know, like, he might not be the right person, but there's somebody on the school board that is. They're not all, moms of liberty. There's somebody there who's outspoken enough to say, I'm not putting a big D on this because, D's really aren't going to fly where I live. But what I am going to do is I'm going to stand up and fight for my school. And I hate the fact that 20% of our school funding just got cut because they shut down the Department of Education. Or I do care about the fact that 17% of kids are on an IEP, my kid included. And if we just completely cut the funding for individual educational plans, IEPs, that's 17% of kids who just lost the education. So I'm going to stand up for those kids. So there's a different way of phrasing it that you don't have to necessarily slap for everybody, slap the big blue D on it, but you can still be there fighting for those communities, for those families, and for the values and for their livelihoods and for the things that they cherish and hold dear. Now, I do think we need to get a lot better about putting the big blue D up there. Like, we do need to get better about branding it, but I get that's maybe not the right place to start. And where was it? Somewhere in Franklin, North Franklin, or in some of these towns, to get those people on board with joining us in this fight for your local school.
One thing that in Ohio that was particularly gratifying after this most recent election is that none of the Moms for Liberty candidates prevailed this year.
Mhm.
which is really so kind of surprising, but very helpful. So there we have an in, and the other thing that's happening in our state is that this voucher plan has gotten to be ridiculously huge and taking money away from the public schools, and they're doing a lot of other things to undermine the public schools. One of the things that Mike was talking about is the difficulty of getting actually public school boards on board with helping to pay for the lawsuit that's going on here in Ohio to strike down the voucher plan. But Ohio is very clear in its constitution that says that this voucher system would be unconstitutional because taxpayer money is supposed to go only to public schools. They've gotten around it somehow, but the first round of the lawsuit has already gone through. And one of the judges, Judge Page, has ruled that indeed the voucher plan is unconstitutional. But what the Republicans in our state are counting on, the legislature, they're counting on the Supreme Court to bail them out because the Supreme Court is all but one Republican. And they've made some pretty awful decisions recently and don't seem to really care about the Constitution all that much. So they're counting on saving it that way. But I think there's a lot of ins that we can make, especially this year when rural communities realize that their public schools are being drained of funding and they have no place to even go because in a lot of communities, there aren't even any private schools that they can go to. So, you get a voucher to go to a private school, and your private school might be 50 miles away or so. So, maybe more than that. So it's not a good bet for rural voters to vote Republican, particularly for the legislators who are systematically draining the public schools. So it seems to me that that's a real good way for us to get in this year.
So, uh, Katie, to your, I 100% agree, Debbie. I'm going to use an example of a radio station where I'm originally from, Broken Bow, Nebraska, small town, 3,800 people. It's got a radio station, and they pipe in a lot of stuff, right? Because it's a small town radio station. But the most important 4 hours of that radio show where like half the town still listens to it. We've forgotten about radio, by the way, which is a problem because a lot of rural voters still listen to radio. They're not all on XM, Sirius XM. Is going to a KCNI. And I tell you, I know the guys who run the station, they don't know the impacts of what the Department of Education closures are going to mean to Nebraska, right? They're busy. They've got lives, they've got kids, they've got to run a radio show, they've got to be fun and entertaining and everything else. They are left of center. I know them personally, but they also know their community is, one Democrat for every 10 Republicans or independents who kind of lean to the Republicans for reasons we've already talked about. So they just have a great show, but half the town tunes into them. So getting information, like here's what this impact means to Nebraska by feeding them that information so they can do their own thing with it. And again, they're not going to slap a big blue D on it, but they are going to talk about how this administration's impacts are going to impact, how this administration's actions are going to impact, the Broken Bow Warriors. And the school and Friday Night Lights, if you cut the Department of Education, you're cutting Friday Night Lights, which is a big deal. Friday Night Lights just being football, of course, everybody here knows that. So Katie, to your point, like, again, that's coming back to where the poster project comes from is understanding that there are these news deserts. There are one of my favorite examples is when we did the one on the closure of USAID, USAID, some people call it. Nobody knows this agency, right? Nobody had heard about it to the extent that, and if anybody had heard about it, it was feeding kids in some foreign country, not feeding kids in my county. And so it was an easy target for them to go after, which is why they went after it, because it was easy and it had no constituency whatsoever. It had constituencies with those of us who think that international development, like Dave was talking about early on, that's a foreign policy strength of ours, that soft power is a foreign policy strength of ours, that We should be a superpower to make sure that, 250,000 kids aren't dying in Malawi from a preventable disease that only costs $1 a day. And that was good for us because, by the way, we're also boxing out China from getting into these places. And then if we act, so lots of reasons. But for 98% of voters in America, they'd never even heard of this place, USAID. They had no idea all they saw was poor kids in some countries are being fed, and we've got poor kids in Franklin County that are not being fed, and that's fucked up. And that's why it was an easy target. So my favorite story from the early days of the poster project was we threw out, again, the impacts that this agency that nobody had heard about on agriculture in all 50 states, 5 territories, in DC, to show that this isn't a foreign agency focused on foreign policy. This is an agency that mattered to rice farmers in Louisiana. And we just blew them up we just got them out as much as we could on social media. A local reporter who, again, has to cover local sports. They've got to cover the local town hall. They've got to cover city council meetings and parish council meetings, and they've got to cover a lot of other stuff. And there's only 2 of them. One of them's doing entertainment. One of them's doing, so they're just spread thin. She just got it on her Instagram reel, and she was like, this is interesting. I had no idea. And then she went out and found 4 Louisiana rice farmers who could get on. And there was a Fox News story down in Louisiana about how the closure of this agency was impacting a pretty important industry to Louisiana. Rice farming is a big deal in Louisiana, right? So there are ways for us to get that information into the hands of whether it's the local radio show hosts in KCNI in Broken Bow, Nebraska, or the local Fox News reporter in the southern tip of, the southernmost parish in Louisiana. And that's ultimately what the origin of the poster project was, is recognizing exactly what you pointed out, Katie, is that people just don't have this information. So if we can gather this information and get it into the hands of people who have a social media presence or who have a radio show or who have, the ability to get these out, that we can get them out there, that we can find more allies that don't think 17% of kids being cut off of special education funding. There's a teacher out there. I guarantee you that you can find a teacher out there who's going to stand up for those kids. Another great story about it is with SNAP, right? Everybody knows about the SNAP funding cuts. I had a woman who, she didn't know anything, like she knew about SNAP. She was on SNAP actually for most of her life. She isn't now, but she loved the gospel hour. And this is in a North Omaha community. She loved listening to the gospel hour on her local radio. And that was her favorite thing. And so I gave her this, and I started talking with her, and she was telling me the other side of the SNAP story was the churches are terrified because if SNAP's not there, which feeds 1 in every 8 Americans, by the way, only $6 a day. It's not a big thing, but if that's not there, then churches, who, by the way, deliver, food pantries get the big food supplies, and then they deliver it across Nebraska to about 900 food pantries across Nebraska. There's 900 of them. They're the last mile of food delivery for the big food banks. 90% of those are churches. She volunteered every Wednesday and Saturday in her local church about just making sure that they could distribute this food to poor folks in North Omaha. And she didn't know the big story. So we gave her the slides on SNAP. We gave her the slides on the impacts to churches and what they're feeling. And that gave her just enough information to feel a little bit comfortable. She had the big idea. And then she did get on her local gospel hour, and the first 5 minutes were about the big stuff that she was reticent to get on the radio show about because she didn't know the big story. All she knew about was every Wednesday and Saturday she volunteers at her church. But they ended up talking for 45 minutes. Only the first 5 minutes of that was about, the big story in the news about SNAP, right? Most of the conversation, the other 40 minutes were just about her every Wednesday and Saturday and the faces and families that she sees. So just giving people enough information to get them over that first hump of like, I don't know the big picture, I don't know the stats. Just giving them that allows us to open up angles to get more voices out there. And so that's ultimately the origin of the poster project, whether it's in ag or education, or we've got ones coming out on. And here's the other thing about it. A lot of people don't realize the impacts that some of these agencies have on their lives, right? I'll give you one example. It's not done yet. It's not posted, but they don't know what NOAA does. NOAA, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. NOAA returns 700% from every dollar. Every dollar we put into NOAA, we get $700 back. So NOAA, everybody thinks, well, if NOAA goes away, we still have the Weather Channel, right? Actually, the Weather Channel is only about 10% of what NOAA does. One of the biggest functions of NOAA is to make sure the FAA works, is to make sure that every shrimper who goes out from that southern Louisiana parish can get home safely because they track ocean currents and they track shifting of sandbars. So for that shrimper to be able to come back home, to get out safe and come back home safe, he cares deeply about NOAA. You know what else NOAA tracks? NOAA tracks space weather. Why does space weather matter? Because we've got modern communications, everything with a circuit. Did you guys get into the Northern Lights that came down recently? We did in Nebraska. They were gorgeous and amazing. NOAA issued alerts to everybody that runs an energy system, a power grid, a satellite station, the US military, the Air Force that Dave works for. They're all getting alerts from NOAA about this impending geomagnetic storm that's about to hit so they can reposition satellites out of the way. They saved us in that one storm alone over $80 billion by alerting people that run communication satellites, that run tower satellites here on the ground. Have you ever gotten an Amber Alert? You know who runs Amber Alert towers? NOAA runs those. So whether it's a ship that's leaving a harbor, they set their entry and exits based on sea level rises and changes, and they get that information from NOAA. So literally touches every aspect of our lives, and we just think of it as the Weather Channel, right? So part of what we're trying to do with this poster project is just give information to people to let you all are going to be a hell of a lot more creative than one guy sitting at his desk in central Nebraska, right? But just giving you the information and letting John's creativity just go wild and say, well, here's another agency that was just cut, APHIS. APHIS, basically, they are what the CDC is for us, diseases. They are that for plants and animals, okay? They've lost 50% of their employment. So now you've got, whether it's screwworm that's threatening our cattle supply from Mexico, or whether it's, bark beetle coming in on every single pallet that comes in with every single person who everything we get from foreign countries comes in on wooden pallets, right? Well, wooden pallets can have bark beetles in them, right? So literally every single pallet is searched by APHIS. If you ever seen the little dogs as you fly in, the little beagles with the USDA, that's APHIS. APHIS sniffs to make sure, because one of the biggest threats to the citrus industry is actually right now in the Caribbean, and they're terrified about the impact that that's going to have. Here's an agency nobody knows about. And just finding a creative way to just go down to some citrus orchards and talk about how bad this disease would be. And hey, there's this little faceless government agent whose whole job it is to make sure that the entire Florida citrus industry does not die. So just in another one, food safety inspectors, 58% of food safety inspectors just grill a hot dog, grill a hamburger, and just say, or walk through your grocery store and just say, hey, all of this is now subject to a 58% cut of food safety. E. coli is a bad deal, man. Listeria is a bad deal. Like, just doing it in your local grocery store, just finding creative ways to just, I don't fault anybody. I didn't know this stuff until I started researching it, but there's a whole lot of things that are being done to support our communities that we don't know about. And there is a teacher who cares deeply about 17% of kids on an IEP. There are farmers who care deeply about screwworm. or coccidiosis or a number of other things. And we just have to find those voices and give them a microphone, because that's how you fight what Katie is saying, that there's no information out there. So we give it to them.
Katie did have a question in the chat. She's wondering if how do you feel about city folks going into rural areas to campaign? Whether
Absolutely.
okay.
Absolutely. Just listen. Here's when I was a candidate, I ran for office. One of the things that I did, one of the things that I was adamant about doing is if I was going to go give a talk in a town, if I was going to go give candidates do that, right? I would drive around the town for 30 minutes before anybody knew I was in town and just look at the town. Talk to somebody at the coffee shop or wherever it was, and just say, what do you love about living here? So that when you're at the door, you can just say, hey, I just went by that's a brand new library you guys got, and it's gorgeous. If you can start the conversation that way by just respecting where they come from and knowing a little bit about the town before you go, don't just get your walk list and go and say, we're here to fight for whatever, because they're going to put the door in your face. If you just spend 20 minutes, 30 minutes going around town talking to somebody about what do you love about living here, and then that becomes something that you can hold on to when you are door knocking, 100%. But it's again back to what we were first talking about. It's that smallest little effort of just knowing that we like where we live, we don't want to move, that we are proud of where we live, that we want to share it with other people. We're proud that we feed and fuel the world. We're proud of the fact that most manufacturing is happening in rural, is happening. That's another stat. Most manufacturing, we think of big Detroit or big Cleveland, right, as the manufacturing hubs, or Dayton, these big manufacturing hubs. Actually, more than 50% of manufacturing happens in small town America. We feed into those, but those are the ones that the news media goes and shows the big picture of the steel refinery in Pittsburgh and all that. Bullshit. More than 50, it's actually closer to 60% of manufacturing happens in towns of less than 10,000 people. So yes, please do go, absolutely, but just take that extra 20 minutes to walk around town so that you're not a foreigner to the place, that you know a little bit about it. And then at the doors, just listen. Do as much listening as you do talking. That's how if you work for that 5%, you're going to get 10, I promise you.
I think Angela might have Angela, did you have your hand up? I wasn't sure.
Yeah, I do have my hand up. First, great presentation. I had a question about the graphics. I was looking at your website and the graphics. Are those specifically targeted for people in rural areas, or could they be used anywhere?
Anywhere. I mean, we're all volunteer, so I'll go through them. What we've done here for folks, this is every state. If you click here, you can get every single state. What we've done is we've tried to give as much information as we can. We can't break it down to the county level. A lot of this information you can find at the county level or even the congressional district level, but we're just two volunteers, so we also have lives and jobs and everything else that we have to do. But we've tried to just take some of these big agencies like Housing and Urban Development or Financial Aid or Department of State, Department of Education, cuts that, hurting churches, FEMA, Library Museums is coming. It's actually done. I just have to post it. Immigration, Medicaid. And now, because I care about the rural vote, Angela, I always really try to make sure that there's a rural thing in there. But no, this is impacting all of our communities. I mean, the area that I was talking about in North Omaha with that woman, North Omaha is a very urban part of my state. It's Omaha, right? It's 500,000 people. It's North Omaha is predominantly Black. It's the rest of the state is not. So no, these are meant to just say, this is what's happening to our state because of this cut. So we were talking about, which one were we talking about before? US. And I send out, and I think Debbie, you might be on this. I'll put this in there. If anybody wants included, I think Dave is too. Every time a new graphic drops,
Okay.
I
Yeah,
send
that's
an
great.
email out to the group just saying, hey, we just dropped a new graphic on, and here's some little ideas that just I thought about. hopefully just to get the juices flowing so you guys can do your own thing with it. It's not prescriptive at all. But no, Angela, use it in Cleveland and use it in, what was that town, Franklin, that we were talking about before. Use it
Yeah.
everywhere, please,
So,
because people just don't
Yeah.
know this.
do we sign up
Yeah.
to get the drop? Do we sign up for the project in order to do that?
Just email me and I'll add you. It's a Google group and I just send it out. It's not a chat group at all. Like, no, we don't get on there and chat about things. It's literally just me shooting it up saying, hey, a new one dropped
So
on
if
this.
everybody on this call, for instance, decides that they would like to see that as it comes out, maybe after you could provide your email address and then we could do that.
Yeah, that'd be great. And
Okay.
if you could just send, and I put it in the chat over here, it's just my name, scott.kleb@gmail.com. If you could just email me and say, um, I'm Nancy. I just see Nancy. Here, just email me and say Nancy, Ohio, and I'll just get you added to the Ohio group.
Oh, great. Okay. Thank you.
Oh, super. That's really great. I just had one more question. So, especially in Ohio, there's a lot of overseas voters from Ohio.
Mhm.
And one of the things that I've run up against when we do phone banking to overseas people is that they feel like they don't want to vote all the way down the ballot because they don't live there anymore. Do you have any arguments that we could use for that? Like to encourage people to do it?
Yeah, so what you just, yes, all of the bad stuff that we're living through, like we all point to Trump, right? I think that's a mistake. All the bad stuff that we're like, where did Moms for Liberty start? They started our school board. That fed into bad shit that happens in our legislatures, right? And our voters in rural areas are not as conservative as our legislators are. But so if you care about if you care about abortion bans that happened across the country, you know where that happened? That happened at state legislatures. That didn't happen at the Congress. That if you care about school funding and vouchers, that happens at our legislatures. That does not happen at Congress. If you care about a lot of the stuff that we do, one of the biggest issues with rural voters is cuts to highway maintenance, right? That's a state program. That's not a federal program. Department of Transportation feeds money in to help offset the costs for states in a big way. But those are decisions that are happening at the legislature. So all of this MAGA stuff that we've been living with, dealing with Trump, Trump, Trump every single day, it started at the Ohio legislature. So the extent to which the people that you're in contact with, Angela, oh, by the way, this administration and these members of Congress are actually making it more difficult for people who are overseas to vote. Um, so,
Yes.
there's a tie, but literally, I can't stress this enough. We were talking about this earlier. What we are living through right now, it started 30 years ago because there were not enough people who cared about state legislatures. There were not enough people who recognized that that's actually where most of the decision making that impacts our lives happen. We've become so nationalized that we think everything happens in Congress, and it frankly doesn't. 80% of our lives are impacted by our legislature, a hell of a lot more than they're impacted by Congress. So I don't know if that's helpful. Like I know it, people don't understand. If they trust you, you can just say that same argument and just say that's why we've got to flip this seat. And frankly, it's easier to get 5%, which again, if you get 5%, if you work your ass off for 5%, you're gonna get 10. I promise you.
Yeah.
But a lot of that change is going to happen at the local level before it happens at these extraordinarily gerrymandered congressional districts. Fight for the legislature and you'll eventually win Congress.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you very much.
One of the things we do here in Ohio, or at least in the our Indivisible group, is we do focus on the state issues and local issues, and it's been a slog to get people to make those calls on the state level. But one of the big problems is that the races are decided for Republicans in the primaries, and the most extreme candidates have the advantage. And they are beholden to ALEC and the Heritage Foundation, all those groups that don't really reflect Ohio voters, but those are the people that they are getting funded by. And so if they win their primary, then they figure they don't even have to campaign, in the general election. They just are a shoe-in. And that's the problem. I think we have to focus more on saying we don't have to give these folks just carte blanche to do whatever they want. And right now, what they're doing is destroying public education, and they're trying to roll back, for instance, some of the um, constitutional amendments that the citizens put together. They're trying to say, no, no, we're going to just ignore what you wanted. So that's what's happening in Ohio, and it is. You're right, absolutely. The state level and the local level are really important, but Ohio did speak out in rural areas, included to take out Moms for Liberty candidates, and I think a lot of people are going to be really ticked about what's going to happen in the rural communities with their schools. And maybe finally more and more will sign on to the Vouchers Hurt Ohio lawsuit, and maybe finally hold those folks to account, because they're not accountable to our voters.
No. And they're also, again, another little tidbit to like lock away.
Mhm.
Your average rural voter is not as conservative as their legislator is.
Right.
Like we've passed medical marijuana here. I mean, in Nebraska, right? We're as red as they come. We're redder than you guys. We passed medical marijuana. We passed family leave. We passed, I mean, you name every progressive piece of, we've passed a bunch of
Scott,
them.
here in Ohio, the abortion constitutional amendment was 60-40.
Yeah.
So that had to have
Yeah.
been a lot of rural voters
It has to be.
voting
You
for it.
don't get
Yeah.
60-40 without there being, again, remember, 38% of voters are rural. We're 20% of the population, but we're 38% of the vote. Back to the original, you got to focus on the rural. So yeah, it was the success that you had with abortion was because of rural voters who are not as conservative as we think of. We all think of them as being red-hatted MAGA mothers, right? They're not. We just have to talk to them. We have to engage them. We talked about education. So real quick on this, on this thing, there's another tool. So every state, you can see it here, but then we also have it broken down by, we talked about education. You click on this, it does click over to every single state. So if we go down to Ohio, we've got the one-page version. That's a vertical, which tends to work better on Instagram. We've got the horizontal that you can use for other ones, but then we've also got a carousel version for every single one of them. Now, the
Wow.
thing to think about these are as, like, you can use them on socials if you want, just as is. They're more, think about them more as like PDFs. They're not 58-page white papers that you have to read through there's some quick facts that we just want to put in your hands to have you guys do stuff with them. So you can see the impacts of what cutting the Department of Education. Department of Education, by the way, is 4,000 people. 2,000 of them focus on K through 12 education. 2,000 of them focus on higher education loans. The portfolio that those 2,000 people on higher education, they oversee a loan portfolio of about $1.7 trillion. Citibank, third largest bank in the world, oversees a loan portfolio of $1.78 trillion. About the same. Anybody want to guess how many employees Citibank has compared to the 2,000 people that work at the Department of Education focused on lending? 20,000. Government's not as broken as we've made it out to be. It just isn't. Like we've been living in this Republican myth of Reagan, I'm here from the government, I'm here to help for too damn long, in my opinion. So here's on K through 12, what the cuts is going to mean. 15% of your school funding is going to be lost in Ohio. Do you think your governor is going to raise taxes to overcome that 15%? So just thinking in terms of, here's the number of people, 17% of all your kids, about 280,000 kids in Ohio are on an IEP. So again, these are just like white papers that aren't 58 pages with 38 pages of footnotes behind them. These are just quick facts for John to get creative with his film team, right? That's it. Go tell the story about one of those 17% of kids. one of those 280,000 kids who just got screwed. And I guarantee you there are people in all of your towns who do care about that kid. And because there's a lot more just like them. So I wouldn't just post them necessarily, just use them however you want to use them. Um, to the point that you were making, because I care about rural and I know the importance of that 5%, I'm always going to push that. Because I'm also building them. So I'm going to always have some rural stuff in there because I know how important that 5% is. Again, work your ass off for 5%, you're going to get 10. So
I'm just looking for hands up. Anybody have a question right now? Break. This is so helpful and interesting. Thank you so much, Scott and Dave. This is really helpful. I think that, just having access to some of this material to be able to use as we go out into those communities will be wonderful. And since Indivisible Central Ohio has become quite decentralized, there are a lot of smaller chapters of Indivisible now starting in other counties that are more rural. So we have kind of a pretty good reach.
Debbie, I'm gonna last thing, and I promise because I know we're at the end of time and I want to give people their day back. We do have two more tools on here at the very bottom of the website. I've talked about the importance of rural radio. It's critical. 70% of us still get our news and our information and our conversations from rural radio. We've got a chat bot that'll help you just give some talking points. Like, hey, I care about this. Oh, here's some radio stations. Here's some things. Again, these are tools to just give that woman in North Omaha to get on her gospel radio show, right? They're just, again, taking the poster project information and just making it a little bit easier to get over that hump. Same thing with a letter to the editor or an op-ed in one of your smaller town papers. We still get small town newspapers and we read it because we do. And Angela, for your people overseas, they probably still get their small town newspaper because they want to see who dies. They want to see who graduates. They want to see the football team, how they did this year. I mean, that sort of thing. So there's a lot, about 80% of the subscriptions for small town newspapers are actually out of the county now, but they just still care about their small town. Last thing, please email me if you want to get on the list and share it. There's no proprietary information. I mean, it's all just publicly available information. And then there's another group that I just want to highlight, Debbie. It's a group called Rural Organizing, and they do a lot of work in Ohio to link up with other groups that do. It's called Rural Organizing. The guy who runs that is a guy by the name of Matt Hildreth. Back to the visibility part, one of the things that they do is they know the importance of yard signs. That we don't like to feel alone. And for that teacher who feels like she's the lonely voice on that school board, what they found is you can actually increase by up to 5% the number of people, if they just know the number of people who vote for Democrats or not vote for the bad guys, if they just see they're not alone in their community. So one of their big focuses is just getting yard signs in rural communities, because then they've got all the stats to show it. That alone can increase the turnout by 5%. Because you're a rural Dem, you're like, I'm the only one out here. Why do I even vote? I'm not like my vote doesn't matter, so why should I turn up? Well, shit, suddenly you start seeing signs pop up. Rural organizing.org is there.
Thank you. That's great. I will be putting together a, kind of a short summary, and whatever the information comes from the chat, and hoping Mike will capture the chat for me so I can put it in there. And then after we get done with the recording, I'm going to be sending it to Mia, who's going to be sending it to John. And then hopefully we'll be able to get a new email list out tonight, not tonight, tomorrow night. And then you should have it for this coming week. So thank you very, very much for coming. This has been fantastic. And John posted to say that he's already got his wheels turning about projects that he could work on. So you've inspired him. And Katie just remarked that Buckeye Rural has been doing work with billboards, and we've been working with them about putting billboards particularly in rural areas. They've got like a theme that goes across the state, and very targeted areas. So that we've been doing it for a while, and Indivisible Central has been contributing to that. So thank you so much. Anybody have a last word before they have to leave? Anybody? I only see a small strip, so I'm not sure if does anybody just speak up if you have any other comments? Otherwise, I've got people in the chat saying how wonderful this was. Okay, I don't see any
Can
more.
I just say one thing really quickly? I, is it possible that you could make a set of graphics about how all the Biden environmental things with solar and wind are being taken away and people are losing their jobs and stuff like that? Is that possible, or is that
Yes, it is. So we've got, and the other thing real quick, that this made me think of the way you said it was perfect, right? Like we use acronyms too much, I think. We defend agencies and acronyms. Like nobody knows what APHIS is. I use that example. Nobody knows what REAP is. REAP is the Rural Energy Program.
Hmm,
Nobody uses REAP. They do use wind and solar though, and jobs. So even though I'm going to use a lot of acronyms, please don't when you're talking about them. Don't use USDA. Talk about Bob, who runs, the Future Farmers of America, who lives in the town, and they're just going to. So anyway, but yes, we've got. So pause. And now I'm going to use a bunch of acronyms. We've got NIH, we've got NSF, National Science Foundation, we've got libraries, we've got NOAA, we've got Department of Transportation, we've got FAA. I do have some stuff on the environmental programs. We've got a long queue. It's myself does the research and another person does the graphics, and we also have day jobs. We're trying to put some stuff together so we can put these out more. But absolutely, Angela, that is in the queue along with some other stuff that's there too.
thank you.
So, yeah.
Thank
So
you
I
very
have a
much.
question for the group. Somebody mentioned Kathleen Clyde. Is there anybody who has a connection with Kathleen Clyde who can get us in front of her?
I'm not sure. She's the new chair, so I'm not really sure, but we can look into that.
Okay.
I don't know if anybody on this call would, but we can. We have different connections. We could
I'm
maybe.
just thinking like the go for 5 and get 10% that Scott is talking about. Like if you look at the special election in Tennessee where it flipped 15 points
Right.
from last year to this year, that I can see lots of situations where if we being Ohio Democrats change some of our messaging and some of our approach to some of these congressional elections here in Ohio, we could also do that 15-point flip and overcome some of that extreme gerrymandering that we have here in the state.
She would definitely be the person to talk to early on. Karen and then Mike.
Yeah, Debbie and John, if you know David Pepper, Blue,
Yes.
Ohio, you've also got Blue, Missouri out there. But Blue, Ohio, he had Catherine Clyde on
Right.
back. They go way back. So if you have a contact to David, you could get through to Kathleen. And she also said during that call that she's very interested in rural organizing. She's been going out around herself, and where that stands with the party, I don't know, but that would be one inroad.
Perfect. Yeah, that's a great idea to go through David with Blue Ohio, and since he does have that connection, and then Sherrod has a connection too. So those who are involved in that campaign might be able to help influence her. But it sounds like she's already on board with that. So that's great. Thank you, Dave, for bringing that up. That was a very good point. Mike had his hand up.
Yeah, Meg Gallipol had to leave.
Yes.
She gave a previous presentation that talked very much aligned with what you guys have said today. She was chair of and she may be of Knox County again, but maybe she has a connection to Kathleen Clyde, because in her previous presentation, she outlined how rural over the last 3 or 4 elections in Ohio, back during 2008, we were big time. 88 counties had representatives from the Democratic Party. And today we have like 1 for all of the bottom half of Ohio. So maybe she would have a connection. That's all. But thank you very much. You guys did great.
Great job.
We appreciate it.
Mm-hmm.
Scott, again, and Dave, we really appreciate you coming, and this has been extremely helpful, and I know that everybody's got their wheels turning, think of how we can use this information. I'll be looking forward to including some of the information in the little write-up, and then your email address so that we can keep up and make sure that we get the most current information. John, did you have something last before you go? Because I noticed you popped up there. John Griffin, did you have something?
No, I'm good. This has been fantastic. I think part of what has struck me is this notion of this content and all of this information has been available. I use similar kinds of information for things that I write up on Substack, but I think you really hit a strong message that I'm taking away, which is let's reframe the narrative. Let's talk about it from the perspective of the people that are impacted and characterize those impacts, and then only as needed back into what's the cause and what are the and then really talk about what are the remedies and try to not make it a political opening, but make it a personal interest, a personal impact opening, and then tie it back to the root cause and what we can do about it. And I think that'll be part of what I'll continue to think about with some of this content as we start to mature some of it.
Anyway, thanks again. I really appreciate it. And I'm sorry to have held you up, but I don't think anybody felt their arm twisted. We've already gone for almost 2 hours, so, but it's been worth every bit of it. And really, thanks so much. Take care, and we'll talk soon. I'll end the recording now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody.